Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And hi, my name is Azri Azmeerun Sari. I'm from NSR24365. My matrix number is 2020-975-563. My research presentation code is SO4. So, my title for this research presentation is Comparison of Sport Motivation Between Gender Among FSRUITM Seremban Student. Background of the study. For the first one is sport involvement. Involvement have been described as individual perception towards the significance element based on the intrinsic needs, value, and interest. Nowadays, in a worldwide scale, the healthy lifestyle is looked common, where sports and physical activities being the important things. So, it is reported by BAM 2018, which is if the individual is very passionate in sport involvement, it may cause them to be ignorant about their time and space, as well as eager to devote their time and energy, and also facilitating exercise adherence. So, the second one is sport adherence. Sport adherence refers to maintain the exercise routine for prolonged time beyond the early stage of implementation. Self-determination and self-regulation will play as a major role in the sport adherence. So in the sport adherence, early involvement in the process who participate in sports and physical activities during their youth are more likely to maintain and have an adherence toward the sport habits. Next, for the third is sport motivation. There are different kinds of motivation in sport, such as intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation. So, it's reported by Mishra and Akaria 2017, there are a different type of motivation between men and women. Intrinsic is when the athlete or individual are motivated to do the activity by themselves and to get a personal benefit. Meanwhile, for the extrinsic, the athlete or the individual motivate to do the activity to earn the reward or to avoid a punishment. And then for the motivation, the athlete or the individual are confused or having a level of motivation. Statement of problem. In a study by Kilin et al. 2011, towards the motivation level of athlete, they found that there was no difference in type of motivation according to the gender. But Mishra and Akaria 2017 reported male and female do not necessarily participate in sport because of the same motivation. There are two different findings that we want to know. Either during the pandemic, the type of motivation for male and female is still the same. Because to sustain in the sport, there are a difference in a motivation based on the perception, behavior, self-determination. Therefore, it is important to address the actual type of motivation so it able to provide strategies that promote ongoing sport involvement. So, for my research objective, there are two, which are, for the first one is to identify the type of sport motivation among FSRUITM Seremban student, and second one is to compare the type of sport motivation between gender among FSRUITM Seremban student. Significance of studies. First is for university student. University student can get the ideas from the research to know the difference between the type of motivation. It also will help the university student to discover the suitable sports motivation between men and women who involved in the sport. So, if they know about their type of motivation, they can lead to enhance their performance, to solve their problem, and also to delegate their self into a suitable area. Second is for coaches. Coaches can get the ideas from the study to provide strategies towards their athlete, so they can delegate their athlete based on the intrinsic or extrinsic. Lastly is for the future study. Researcher can based on this study and make a deeper research to know the best or suitable strategy for each gender that participate in sport. When it's come to the motivation of sport involvement, future research can look up towards the type of motivation based on their sport, whether it will be done by individually or in the team. Next is literature review. Vellnum P 2014 reported that motivation is one of the most important factors affecting human behavior. Maslow 1954, based on the Maslow hierarchy, individuals strive for different goals and have their own hierarchy of needs to keep us going, to give us a feeling of importance and self-worth, a feeling of proudness and achievement. Rodriguez et al. 2020 reported over 46% of Europe population is physically inactive, which is it shown an increase in a sedentary lifestyle compared to a healthy lifestyle. Living in a healthy lifestyle is a good choice because people who are physical inactivity will meet the result in a pattern of chronic illness and puts people at a risk, disease, and early death. In the context of sport involvement, it is one of the important factors that might be influenced by the exercise adherence. So, Goddard et al. 2021 reported that 80% of people who begin in a sport program do not stick with it, while initially, many people are motivated to begin an exercise program. Those who have a good exercise adherence can resist the temptation to stop exercise. There is the reason why people who have an adherence in sport do not stop exercise. It is because many chronic diseases can be prevented or treated while regular physical exercise. But to have a good sport adherence, they need have a good motivation. Motivation is an internal dynamic factor that keeps our behavior for every element. It influences how we believe, feel, and connect with others. Ricker et al. 2004 reported high level of motivation in sport is commonly recognized as a necessary condition for achieving the ability of athletes. Sport motivation include exhibitionism and competitiveness, which for intrinsics and extrinsics, it contributes to external motivation, socialization, and to play to the maximum. So, for research design, I use a cross-sectional research design. A cross-sectional research design is a type of observation study. This type of research is to measure the outcome and exposure in the study participation at the same time. So, for the sampling, I use the FSR UiTM Seremban student. Total number of FSR Seremban students according to UiTM Seremban website, April 2021 is 890 students. The total population taken is 323 students after added 20% based on the table Kerrinch and Morgan 1970. So, for the instrumentation for this study, I use Sport Motivation Scale, which is SMS28. This scale assesses people motivation for engaging in sport activities. It contains 28 items, 4 items for each of 7 sub-scales, assessed on a 7 Likert scale. A 7-point Likert scale was used indicating their preference from 1, which is does not correspond at all, to 7, which is correspond exactly. So the Cromwell alpha for the intrinsic motivation is 0.86, extrinsic motivation is 0.82, and a motivation is 0.75. The respondents are needed to answer a total of 28 question items from the sport motivation scale. The SMS test set have a 7 factor of sport motivation, which are divided into intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation. For intrinsics, there have a 3, which are for the first one is to know, to accomplish, and to experience the stimulation. And then for extrinsics also have 3, which are for the first one is identified, second is introjection, third is external regulation, and last is a motivation. Data collection procedure. So, for the first one, I need to get an ethical approval. Second, run a pilot test. Third, distribute questionnaire to the respondent through the Google Form link. And fourth, collect the questionnaire and analyze data. Data analysis is come from the research objective. So for the first one, to identify the type of sport motivation among FSRU items from students, I use a descriptive statistic. Second is to compare the type of sport motivation between gender of FSRU items from students. I use independent t-test. This is the result for descriptive statistic, which is to identify the type of sport motivation among FSRU items from one student. So, if you can see, there are the type of motivation, intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation. So, the total number of respondent is 332, and the mean of age for intrinsic is 6.01, extrinsic is 5.93, and a motivation is 2.82. Okay, next, the result of the independent test for the comparison of sport motivation between gender of FSRU items from one student. So, if you can see at the table, they have a type of motivation, intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation, gender between male and female, the number of respondents for each gender. Okay, the mean for intrinsic for male is 5.98, for female is 6.03. So for the extrinsic, the mean for male is 6.09, for female is 5.77. For the motivation, the mean for male is 2.58 and female is 3.07. And there are a standard deviation and the significant. For the intrinsic, the significant is 0.4, the extrinsic is 0.000, and a motivation also the same with the extrinsic, which is 0.00. It means they are not significant. And I have done at my report, we use skewness and kurtosis, and the data is normal. Discussion towards the result of this study. This study showed that the intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation have a bit same range toward the mean. As evident in this study, every single person have a different type of motivation based on their sports and surrounding. Female can be more intrinsically driven than men in sport because they have a more self-determined, and female build the confidence to be sociable and sporting compared with male. Male seem more drawn to compete in sport involvement and push themselves towards the maximum. Based on the result of independent test for the comparison on sport motivation between gender of FSR student at UiTM Seremban, that shown that female mean is the highest for the intrinsic motivation. It is because female have a desire to achieve in an activity to enjoy and experience while they try to reach their own goal. The result shown that female also love to get a new experience such as enjoyment and thrill. Meanwhile, for men mean is highest at extrinsic motivation. Male major goals are being in sport to obtain reward and to avoid a punishment. Extrinsic factor is slightly same with the intrinsic, but male are more drive to the extrinsic motivation because of the external factor such as to get a cash incentive, push themselves to the limit, and the competitive. So, the result shown that Mishra Akaria 2017 report that males and females do not necessarily participate in sport because of the same motivation is still the same while during this pandemic area. So, the male and female have a different type of motivation, which is for female it's more to intrinsic and male is more to extrinsic. this is the reference that I use in this study. I think that's all from me. Thank you and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.